Kunja Vihari.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari. Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Giri Barodari. Yashoda Nandana Brajajana Ranjana. Yashoda Nandana Brajajana Ranjana. Yamuna Tira Vanachari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari. Jai Vishnu Bhad Paramahamsa Prabhupada Shashtrut Sudasvi Srimad Krishna Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada ki jai. ISKCON Sansthapak Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Jai Vishnu Bhad Paramahamsa Prabhupada Shashtrut Sudasvi Srimad Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaj Prabhupada ki jai. Ananta Koti Vaishnava ki jai. Namacharya Srilas Thakur ki jai. प्रेम से गो शिक्षा चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री द्वैत दादर श्रीवासादि गौर भक्तवृंद की जय. All glories to the assembled Buddhas. All glories to the assembled Buddhas. All glories to the assembled Buddhas. All glories to Shri Guru and Shri Gauranga. All glories to Shri Prabhupada ki jay. Om Jnana Timiranda Snananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasadi Gaura Bhaktivinoda. Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram. Muhammad Shri Guru Devatarnam Paramatma Chaitanya Mishra. Hare Krishna. So welcome you all to the Saturday summary study of Srimad Bhagavatam, second canto, chapter 2 and the second half. So in the second half, we see that the process of self-realization through the Ashtanga Yoga process and also the comparison of the various processes will be discussed today. So we start from the 19th sloka, which mentions about how by one should leave this material body through the process of this Ashtanga Yoga. So which mentions that one should have a scientific knowledge by which one will be situated in absolute realization. And the process is giving up the material body by blocking the air hole. That means the hole through which the stool is evacuated with the heel of one's foot and by lifting the life air from one place to another in the 6 primary places. So actually this is the Ashtanga Yoga process whereby the yogi is actually supposed to go a very solitary place, either to the forest or the Himalayas. He should be there living the life of an ascetic, sustaining on whatever is available there, like fruits, roots, dry leaves, etc. And if nothing is there, then he has to sustain on air, and that's all. Generally, there is no cooking allowed in this type of a process. When you live like that, then what happens? The body, the mind, all our actions are all focused on the Paramatma feature in the heart, and then one leaves the body by this process, which is further explained. Now, actually, in the Satya Yuga, the body was fit enough to perform this process. But in Kali Yuga, the body is not so very strong to perform this. The body is weak, and therefore, first and the foremost is that no one would like to leave his home and perform this difficult task. Then one is supposed to take bath 3 times in a day in the very cold water. So all these are austerities which is generally not possible in this age. Apart from that, the most important thing is that the mind is always disturbed, always thinking on external material nature. So this process of leaving the body is not very practically possible. And then there is a process of living through what is called, it is said that there are 6 chakras within this body. So the yogi raises the life air from the navel to the heart, to the throat, and so forth, and then finally reaches to a point called Brahma Randhara, and then leaves the life air through that place, which is in the center of the skull, near where the brain is situated. So which is generally, it is very difficult. It is not that it is impossible, but it's also a recognized process, but then it is not possible to apply in this age of Kali. So therefore, then further it is mentioned in the following slokas as to how the areas through which the life air is given up is uh, it passes through 7 openings, namely the 2 eyes, the 2 nostrils, 2 ears, one the mouth, etc. Generally, it is said that when one leaves his body, his life air leaves through the mouth. That's why we see that when a person is dead, always his mouth will be open. This is a general fact. But then there are other areas also, like I mentioned, through which the life air can be given up. So, but if the life air is not given up through this Brahma Randra, the process which I mentioned, through the brain, then one does not get liberated from this material world, irrespective of whatever passage that he gives up, whether it is through the mouth or through the eyes or the ears, then one does not get liberated. Therefore, this Ashtanga yoga process actually blocks these 7 holes, and then he makes a hole in the cerebral part of the skull and leaves his body. But then what happens is that in this also there are several processes that are involved, which we might have heard, what they normally call as yoga. What they term as yoga these days is more of a physical exercise, but this was a progress process that was existing in the right perspective. Like the stages that are involved are like yama, niyama. Yama involves external purification, like taking bath in cold water. Niyama involves internal purification. Asana involves practicing various postures. Pranayama, which is basically controlling the breathing by inhaling, exhaling, and retaining the air, which is the final goal to stop the breathing. The entire process of this Ashtanga yoga is to come to a stage of stopping the breathing totally so that one can focus on the super soul situated in the heart. Then there are stages like dharana, samadhi, where one is situated totally on the spiritual platform. As long as one is situated on the material platform, it is not possible to focus or meditate on the super soul in the heart. So therefore, to reach that stage, one has to follow these processes. But in today's yoga system, what we see, they may focus mainly on yama, niyama, up to the stage of breathing, that is pranayama. The process basically what it does is that it tries to control the life air and thereby control the senses from all other engagements and thus reach a stage of samadhi. This samadhi is a stage or is a stage of trance by which one can remember the Lord's personal feature along with his name, form, etc. But then Srila Prabhupada also mentions that this is a mechanical process. In today's age, it is more of a mechanical process than a scientific process. That is why we started the class with scientific knowledge. So this knowledge will not help us achieve this process. But in the past, in Satya Yuga, there are examples of how devotees have achieved success by practicing. For example, Dhruva Maharaj could perform this difficult task even at the age of 5, when he was asked by his mother to go to the forest and meditate on the Supreme Lord. So, but here it is not possible. For the Kali Yuga, the process that is given is just simple process of chanting the holy name of the Lord. In Satya Yuga, the process was Ashtanga Yoga, sometimes also called meditation. In Treta Yuga, the process of deliverance was sacrifices, where we say Idam Krishnaya Namaha, which actually means that it doesn't belong to me, it belongs to Krishna. And then in Dwapar Yuga, the process recommended was deity worship in the temple, which also, though people might say so, and it is effective also, but two vitally important things in the in the process of deity worship is, one is punctuality and the second is purity. Of course, there are other factors also, but these are two very critical factors in terms of deity worship, that is punctuality and purity. But in the Kali Yuga, the easiest and the simplest process is given, which is chanting the holy name of the Lord, which we will discuss in the later chapters, later slokas of this chapter. Then, though a process is given to reach Brahma Jyoti or Vaikuntha through this Ashtanga Yoga process, in this also there are two processes. That is, one is a step-by-step process, and the other one is a straight process. Example is like one can go to the fourth floor by a lift, or one can go to the fourth floor by going to first floor by walking up to the first floor, from first floor to second floor, second to third, third to fourth. These are two ways, but the easiest process is taking to the lift and going straight to the fourth floor, which is the process of Bhakti Yoga. Also, through Bhakti Yoga, one can reach the topmost planet in the spiritual world, which is Goloka Vrindangana. But through Ashtanga Yoga, one may go maximum up to one of the Vaikuntha planets. That also with a lot of difficulty, which also I described. It is not practically possible. And in this, the sloka 22nd onwards, the sloka mentions, if a yogi maintains or he has a desire to have some material enjoyment, like transference to the other planets, heavenly planets, or Brahmaloka, Satyaloka, Maharloka, Janaloka, he can do that by this, achieve that also by this process, through which he can achieve the eightfold mystic perfections. These eightfold mystic perfections are becoming lighter than the lightest, heavier than the heaviest. He can fly to other planets without any difficulty. So these are all mystic perfections one can get by the process of this Ashtanga Yoga. But this is possible if one has uh, some material desire, as also he is simultaneously practicing this Ashtanga Yoga process. These material desires, whatever is there, they can be achieved even by the practice of devotional service, of practicing chanting the holy name of the Lord. And if one has these desires, the Lord will also fulfill those desires. So just for the sake of trying to achieve some heavenly happiness, one need not have to go through difficult processes. But one who gets this can get these benefits of eightfold mystic perfections. But what happens is that also he reaches a stage where he wants to dominate himself, because when one gets some material opulence, then the tendency is that he also wants to enjoy out of it. And over that, due to that, his false ego also increases. And by increase of false ego, one again has to come back to this material world. So, but in this process, what happens is that the yogi might dissolve his gross body, that is the material body like earth, water, fire, what he has got here. But he takes his subtle body, like the mind, with him to all these places. And that's why this step of process is called Krama Mukti. And what happens is that in this type of process, the subtle body also gets subtler and subtler and subtler. And then if the yogi is very sincere in going back to the spiritual world, he can dissolve at each step. At each step, there are so many planetary systems that he goes through also. Like, for example, it is said that Uttarayana, there is a planet. Dakshinayana, there is a planet. For the day, there is a planet. For the night, there is a planet. So the preceding deities, what they do is, when the yogi reaches to this one of the planets, they help this yogi to go to the next level of higher planet, as until the stage that the yogi feels that he has fulfilled his desire in this planet. So they can enable him to go to the next level where he gives up the previous material desires that he had. That means when he comes to this planet, he has got some desires. But the moment he feels that he has got it, then the presiding deity enable him to go to the next higher level planets. This way, the yogi can travel to the heavenly planets, to any of these, many of these heavenly planets, along with his mind and also the senses. But actually, devotees of the Lord, they are not interested in this. Basically, they are looking at serving the Lord, by which they can give pleasure to the Lord, and at the same time, they also derive some happiness, spiritual happiness, which we call as bliss. In the subsequent sloka, it is mentioned that even before, even after crossing these so-called planets like Uttarayana, Dakshinayana and all, then the yogi, what does he says that he reaches Maharloka, Janaloka, Tapaloka, and Satyaloka. And beyond this actually is the Vaikuntha planets. Though some examples of those who can travel through all these planets are, example given in Srimad Bhagavatam. One is Narad Muni. He is called a spaceman who can travel anywhere to any planet. And also Dhruva Muni is one who had these mystic powers. But like I mentioned, a common man cannot reach this stage of perfection through this process. Then subsequent sloka, here it is mentioned that Sukadeva Goswami explains to Maharaj Parikshit that after going through this, before Brahmaloka, the yogi actually comes to a place called Vaishvanara. It is the planet of deity of fire. Like we use fire for cooking. What happens when we cook is that the ingredients get boiled and then all the contamination is purified. So similarly, a yogi reaches this Vaishvanara planet and then he gets where this is the preceding deity is the deity of fire. So where he gets purified of all the contaminations that he has got through the contact with this material world. And then he reaches the Brahmaloka. And then what happens is that when he reaches Brahmaloka, the yogi actually can have two options at that stage. Actually, he sees a sort of fire. This is at the time. This happens actually at the time of annihilation. He sees a fire coming out from the mouth of Ananta, lotus mouth of Ananta, from the bottom of the universe. So when this fire starts annihilating the lower planetary systems, the yogi starts feeling the heat at whichever higher planetary system he is situated in, and then he tries to go up. And the whole, one part of the universe is burned to ashes. And then thus he has two options. One is at the time of full annihilation, and the other is at the time of partial annihilation. At the time of full annihilation, he has got an option whereby he can leave his life air or he can leave the body at the time when Lord Brahma leaves the body. That is the night of Brahma, when Brahma goes to sleep. The other option is that complete annihilation. At that time also he can leave the body. But in either of the stages, he can go to Vaikuntha, or if he wants, he can come back also to this material world. But for a common man, it is mentioned that these are very, very difficult to achieve. And these are statements that are given in Vedic science. Now, there are two ways that one can accept these statements. Of course, modern science does not have this information at all. But these informations are given in the Vedic science, in the Vedas, and the summary of which is given in Srimad Bhagavatam, which we are studying now. Now, we can accept these Vedic versions of this Vedic version as authentic because it is already accepted by the previous acharyas. Whereas the process which cannot be understood by scientific modern science, it cannot be taken as authentic because so far mankind has not been able to find out even whether actually they went to moon planet or not. They say that they have went to moon, But Srila Prabhupada mentioned that they have not gone to moon because we don't have the body suitable enough to go to the moon planet. So we can, the only way that we can accept it is that the science that is given in the form of Vedic science given in Srimad Bhagavatam, because it's accepted by all the great acharyas. Now, in this Brahma Loka, it is said that the duration of life is very, very long. There is no old age. There is no death. It does not mean there is no death at the Brahma Loka, but compared to what we have in the material world, that is the earthly planets, it is the duration is far, far long. So that is why it is nearly said they're close to deathlessness. But there is no old age like what we see here. They live up to the last point. When they leave the body, they are at the same age. They don't, the age doesn't go like what we experience here. And then there is no lamentation. Whatever lamentation they have, the only lamentation is that when they see suffering souls like us, or the souls which are suffering in the other planetary systems, out of their compassion for these living entities, they have a suffering which they feel in their mind only because they have a mind which way they feel the suffering. There are some quotes regarding the life in Brahmaloka, the other cantos of Srimad Bhagavatam. In fourth canto, in 29 chapter, there's a mention that the inhabitants of Brahmaloka always are so, they're all devotees of the Lord. Nobody can go to Brahmaloka as it is. They all discuss the narrations of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, that when the annihilation takes place or whenever they desire, they can be directly also transferred to the spiritual world. And then one who does not have to go up and down, who desires to be in the spiritual world, he stays back there. And once one goes to the spiritual world, he does not come back to this material world, which is full of these miseries. There is another quote in the Srimad Bhagavatam, which says that whoever executes his occupational duty, that means we all have a swadharma, like a Brahmana. For instance, a Brahmana continues to act as a Brahmana, not the so-called Brahmanas that we find in today's world, but a Brahmana means a real devotee of the Lord who is always situated on the devotional platform. If one performs the same Swadharma for 100 births, he becomes eligible for promotion to Brahmaloka, where Lord Brahma lives. And Brahma's life is 311 trillion and some billion years. So relatively, it is said that there is no death there, which also occurs 100 years of their lifespan, not our lifespan. Compared to ours, it is about 311 trillion years and some more billion years. But this suffering, like I mentioned, is also there also. Srila Prabhupada also quotes in one of the class lectures that many times residents come from Brahmaloka because they are all devotees of the Lord. They also come from Brahmaloka and assist in preaching the glories of the Lord. Then the 28th sloka is mentioned that after reaching Satyaloka or Brahmaloka, the devotee is specifically able to be incorporated fearlessly by the subtle body in an identity similar to that of the gross body. And one after the another, he gradually attains a stage of existence. Like what happens is that there is a universal covering, which is consisting of earth, water, fire, air, ether, etc. Just like our body is made up of earth, water, fire, air, ether, etc. There is a universal covering which covers this material universe composed of these elements called earth, water, fire, air, ether, etc. It is said that there are 8 layers starting from earth, water, fire, air, ether. Then there is Mahatattva, then false ego, and then Pradhana. So each layer, it is said that is about 10 times the size of the previous layer. So one has to penetrate through all these layers and then only reach the Brahmajyoti. So one who reaches the Satyaloka by dint of the spiritual perfection by this yoga practice, can have three types of perfection. One can attain a specific planet by dint of pious activities. Then one who worships the Hiranyagarbha worship of form of the Lord, he can get liberation along with the liberation of Brahma. But one who attains the place by dint of devotional service is specifically mentioned in the sloka. He can penetrate into all these coverings of the universe and ultimately attain his spiritual identity, which is in the one of the spiritual planets. So one can get pious heaven by pious activities along with devotional service. One can attain heavenly planets. One can also get uh, liberation along with Lord Brahma, and also one can attain his spiritual identity, that is serving the Supreme Lord, which is also attained by devotional service. So there are two ways by which one can attain. That is, one by process of devotional service, and the other by through the practice of this Ashtanga Yoga. But Ashtanga Yoga being not possible, one can achieve this even by the practice of the Bhakti Yoga. But one who practices Bhakti Yoga does not have these material desires. Then on the 29th sloka, there is mention as to how the devotee surpasses the subtle objects also. He's got his senses, because up to the Brahmaloka planet, he's got his senses also. So he gives up all these senses like touch, smell, etc. in each of these planets. And that is how he penetrates the 7 layers of this universe. And the total universe, it is said, is about 4 billion miles in diameter. And thus the yogi, after surpassing all these gross and subtle forms of covering, he also gives up his false ego in the false ego planet covering, and he finally gives up everything that he has got material and crosses even the Mahatattva, Pradhana, etc. And thus he reaches a stage of pure self-realization. That pure stage of self-realization is called as being one who is liberated as an eternal servant of the Supreme Lord. And this practice is also not recommended. That is, Ashtanga Yoga practice is also not recommended, because in this age, nobody is aware of this particular yoga practice. Generally, people are aware of the yoga as a physical exercise, but no one is aware of what the goal of this process is and what is the actual process, which we discussed so far. And it is also said that actually the mind, it is made, the purification of the mind is the most difficult thing. And this purification of mind is possible only when one becomes a servant of the Lord. Therefore, even if one reaches a mode of goodness, which may happen if one reaches Brahmaloka, there is every possibility that he may fall down. So therefore, one is required to achieve a stage of purified with goodness, which is called Vasudeva Sattva. This Vasudeva Sattva is the only one that can enable one to enter into the kingdom of God. But one who takes up and utilizes all the same resources that he has got in this material body in Bhakti Yoga, he can understand the importance of service to the Lord through the costless mercy of the Lord, as well as his spiritual master. A sincere soul is actually helped by the Lord through meeting a bona fide spiritual master who is a bona fide representative of the Lord. And by following the instruction of such a spiritual master, one gets the seed of Bhakti Yoga. So Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu recommends that one should sow the seed of Bhakti Yoga in the heart and nurture it by watering this process. And the process is through hearing and chanting the holy name, glories, pastimes, etc. When one comes to this chanting of the holy name, which now we are going to discuss some of the important points of Bhakti Yoga, there are 3 stages in chanting the holy name of the Lord. The first stage is called Nama Parad, where the living entity or the human being might be chanting the holy name, but he might also be committing offenses. It's called the offensive stage. The second stage is called the namabhas, or the reflexive stage of the chanting of the holy name. And the third is the offenseless chanting of the holy name. That is between offensive and offenseless. There is one stage which is the namabhas. And the third is the Shuddha, called the Shuddha Nam, in which one actually chants the holy name purely. The chanting of the holy name is so powerful that even if one reaches the second stage of chanting, that is the namabhas, one can get liberated, which one is trying to get by the Ashtanga process. Ashtanga yoga process, actually, one becomes frustrated and wants to be merging into the Brahma Jyoti. But one can get liberation by chanting of the holy name, even if one reaches the second stage, that is Namabhas. And actually, it is the third stage, that is Shuddhanam, that enables one to enter the kingdom of God. There is another important point that in the Bhakti Yoga, that the goal of Bhakti Yoga is not to attain a particular destination, but the goal is to attain love of God, which is the actual constitutional position. But the process is important in the sense that one should be very careful to protect his Bhakti Rata peach, that is to avoid the mad elephant disease of committing offenses. I'm skipping these offenses because it's a little bit longer. The subsequent version is mentioned. Only a purified soul can attain perfection of associating with the personality of Godhead in complete bliss and satisfaction in his constitutional state. So whoever is able to renovate such devotional perfection is never again attracted by the so-called illusory energy of this material world, and he never returns also. That means a purified soul. So the Ashtanga Yoga process goal is also to reach a stage of purity, and Bhakti Yoga process is also the same, of attaining the love of God through by becoming pure. And when one becomes purely situated, he attains complete bliss, being situated in his constitutional position. And when one reaches this stage of perfection, even if he sees this material world, he does not develop a taste to come back. In the notes, there are some important points, like in the Vaikuntha, in the spiritual sky, there are unlimited number of Vaikuntha planets. So the devotee actually is eligible to go to one of these planets in the Vaikuntha planet, depending upon his, there is some prasad that we all have, a mellow that each living entity has got, which becomes revealed as he progresses in the path of devotional service. And then if he becomes purified in that, in one lifetime also, he can reach these spiritual planets. And the number of liberated souls in these spiritual planets is far greater than the number of conditioned souls like what we see in this material world. Now, the impersonalists, generally, those who take to the process of Jnana Yoga. Now we come to the different stages of yoga. One is Karma Yoga, one is Jnana Yoga, one is Dhyana Yoga, and the other one is Bhakti Yoga. This is called the Yoga ladder. Karma Yoga is a process by which one has desire for material results, material happiness. Side by side, he may be performing devotional service. But what happens is that he enjoys some heavenly happiness, and once those results of those pious activities are over, he comes back to this material world. Or he can also go to this next stage, that is Jnana Yoga. Jnana Yoga is one where one tries to merge into the impersonal Brahma Jyoti. And the third stage, or the third floor, like we can call it as, is called the Dhyana Yoga or the Ashtanga Yoga, which we have discussed. And the final stage is Bhakti Yoga. Now, in all these stages, if we see, yoga cannot be achieved just as a process on its own. Yoga means it is connection with the Supreme Lord. There is nothing called yoga without the Supreme Lord. That's how the yoga word comes also. So, if you see Karma Yoga or Jnana Yoga or Bhakti Yoga, it requires a little bit of knowledge. And that is why it is said that one must have a tinge of Bhakti, because you cannot practice Karma Yoga without knowing to whom the results have to be given. One cannot practice Jnana Yoga without knowing what is this impersonal Brahman effulgence. The impersonal Brahman effulgence is like the glaring effulgence coming out from the body, emanating from the body of the Lord. And the Dhyana Yoga process is meditating on the super soul who is situated as Paramatma in one's heart. So all these are connected to the Supreme Lord. So one must understand something about the Supreme Lord, for which knowledge it is required about the Lord. That is why it is called, without a tinge of bhakti, one cannot practice any of these yogas also. Also, there are many impersonalists who want to merge into the glowing effulgence called the Brahma Jyoti, but they have no conception of devotional service, or they don't have any conception of the personal form of the Lord. And when they practice this and attain Brahma Jyoti, they are compared to what is called a certain species of fish, which is flowing in a river. Now, the river actually goes always, the water in the river flows towards the ocean. But what happens is that when this fish goes to the ocean, they cannot stay there in the ocean, because the urge for sense gratification brings this fish back to the river. So similarly, when a materialist becomes frustrated in his, see, so many materialist people, they get frustrated at some point or the other, because either they don't attain, and even if they attain, they become frustrated.
तो आज ऐसे ही रह गए तीर्थ प्रभु के.
Yeah. So many times when they get frustrated, they want to become liberated. They want to get liberation from this material suffering. So when they enter this Brahmajyoti, they don't have any association there, and they don't have higher engagement of the senses. So because of that, when they feel the suffering again there, they come back to this material world to become entangled once more in the wheel of birth and death. There are 5 important points it is said that one must give up before he leaves this material world. The first point is he must give up all the desires for material enjoyment. Second is he should refrain from worshipping any of the demigods. Because if you worship a demigod, the demigods will give you a lot of material happiness, but then again it binds you. Then the third point is he should devote himself only to the worship of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He must also give up the idea of becoming one with the Lord. That is the one which I mentioned about entering the Brahma Jyoti. And the last thing that he should also give up is a desire to have some wonderful powers. So these Ashtanga Yoga process or other processes may give some powers which can keep you bound in this material world. The moment you get some power, you are allured by that power to enjoy. So that desire to enjoy automatically manifests. So that's why it is said that these 5 important points are very, very important for one to become free from this material world. But a pure devotee of the Lord does not have any expectations, and he simply practices yoga, bhakti yoga, through which he attains peace and bliss, which is what everyone is looking for. Now, if you see what we want in this life, we are all looking for peace and we want some happiness. There cannot be any happiness if you are not peaceful. So both peace as well as happiness, in spiritual definition, that happiness is higher than the material happiness which we experience. That is why it is called bliss. So both peace as well as bliss can be attained by one who practices devotional service without any expectation from the Lord. Now, why it is said that without any expectation? Because the Lord knows what you want and he knows what is suitable for you. So if you are satisfied with whatever comes on its own, then you don't have any expectation from the Lord. So this is what is called pure devotion service. Now in the 32nd sloka, Sukadeva Goswami is telling Maharaj Parikshit that all what that I have described in reply to your proper inquiry is according to the version of the Vedas, and it is eternal truth. This was personally described by Lord Krishna to Brahma, with whom the Lord was satisfied upon being properly worshipped. So, in this sloka, there are two important points that one can achieve the highest destination or higher destination either through the direct process of reaching the kingdom of God or also gradual process through other planetary systems which we discussed. And both these processes are described in the Vedic versions in the Vedas. And here Sukadeva Goswami confirms that this truth was disclosed by none other than the Supreme Personality of Godhead himself to Lord Brahma, who is the first authority on the Vedas. Lord Krishna spoke the Vedas to Brahma, then it came from Brahma to Narada, and by Narada to Vyasadeva, and so forth. So there is no difference in the versions. The truth is eternal, and it cannot have any other variations or deviations. That is the way of knowledge, attaining the knowledge, knowing the knowledge contained in the Vedas. It is not something that can be understood either by scholarships or by interpretations of mundane scholars. And there cannot be anything added, there cannot be anything subtracted, because it is the truth. So one has to, for this to understand and know and understand this truth, one has to accept some authority. So that is why modern scientists are also authorities, but they have limited sense. They cannot understand, they can only understand scientific truths, but the Vedic truths are all given in the Vedic knowledge, and one has to accept it as it is. And if one has accepted a spiritual master, he will clear the illusion in the living entity and make this agyan or ignorance, and clear this and give the knowledge to the disciple. So this was the reply given by Sukadeva Goswami to Parikshit Maharaj, because Parikshit Maharaj, as we discussed in the last chapter of the first canto, Parikshit Maharaj asked the question as to what is the duty of a man who is going to leave his body or who is going to die. So this is how Sukadeva Goswami gives a reply, that hearing and process of chanting are the process by which one can be delivered in this Kali Yuga. There are some quotes in Srimad Bhagavatam, some important quotes I found. By hearing Srimad Bhagavatam, one's tendency to lord over the material nature subsides. That means when we are in this material world, there is a tendency for us to lord over the material nature. But when by hearing Srimad Bhagavatam, this tendency to lord over the material nature automatically vanishes. There is also a quote given in Srimad Bhagavatam. This is a quote from Chaitanya Bhagavat, where it says, given two statements from the Hari Bhakti Vilas. It says, one who considers Srimad Bhagavatam more dear than his own life will never suffer the punishment of Yamaraj for even 100 kalpas. That means if one who considers the Srimad Bhagavatam what we are discussing more dear to one's own life will never suffer the punishment of Yamaraj. But on the other hand, one who does not appreciate the study of Srimad Bhagavatam, or who hinders, or one who hinders others in the study of Srimad Bhagavatam, causes 100 generations of family members to go to hell. That means if somebody wants to discuss or hear Srimad Bhagavatam, but there is someone creates a hindrance, the person who is creating hindrance suffers for 100 generations. 100 generations of the family members go to hell. So these are the important factors when we come to understanding Srimad Bhagavatam. Now, whatever descriptions have been given, they are given in Vedas. Like I mentioned, Vedas have so many verses that it is not possible for a common man to understand. But the summary study of Vedas is given in Srimad Bhagavatam. Like we are today discussing the second half of the Srimad Bhagavatam, second canto, second chapter, second half. Like that, the whole summary study of the Vedas is given in Srimad Bhagavatam. And it is the same as to what is given in Vedas. So understanding the Vedas is difficult in this Kali Yuga because we don't have the intelligence. But it is the essence of the Vedas is already given in Srimad Bhagavatam. Now, in the last 4 verses of this chapter, Sukadeva Goswami is summarizing. He says that in verse 33, he says, for those who are wandering in the material universe, there is no other auspicious means of deliverance than what is aimed at direct devotional service to Lord Krishna. That means devotional service is or direct bhakti yoga is the only absolute and auspicious means of deliverance from this grip of material existence. So devotional service is the easiest and direct method of deliverance from these miseries of material. The means of jnana or other allied disciplines are not independent in delivering a performer. Such activities also require a tinge of bhakti yoga, which I have discussed. And this happens after many, many births, after many, many years, and after many, many births. It is not that one takes up this process of Ashtanga yoga and all immediately he gets delivered in this birth. It takes many, many processes, many, many births. But through the process of Bhakti Yoga, one can get delivered even in one life cycle. And the process of attaining success in this Bhakti Yoga is only Sadhana Bhakti. This Sadhana Bhakti is what we are practicing. That is beginning with the process of hearing and chanting. So far, we have discussed the step-by-step process. Now we will discuss about the direct process of devotional service by which one is retained in the original constitutional position. The Lord himself tells Arjuna in Bhagavad Gita 6 chapter 47 sloka, Yoginam api sarvesham madgadena antaratmana shraddhavan bhajate yomam same yuktatamo mataha. He says, of all the yogis, the one who with great faith, who always abides in me, thinks of me within himself, and renders transcendental loving service unto me, he is most intimately united with me in yoga, and he is the highest of all. That is my opinion. That means the Lord says, of all the yogis, one who has great faith in the Lord and who always thinks of the Lord and also renders transcendental loving service, he is the most intimately united with the Lord in yoga, and it is the highest and the best. This is what the Lord declares in Bhagavad Gita to Arjuna. Then in the 34th sloka, it is said that Sukadeva Goswami says, the great personality Brahma, with great attention and concentration of the mind, studied the Vedas 3 times, and after scrutinizingly examining them, he ascertained that attraction for the Supreme Personality of Godhead is the highest perfection of religion. So Lord Brahma studied these Vedas 3 times. Now, we can't study a Veda even once, but Brahma had to study 3 times. And after scrutinizingly examining them, he came to a conclusion that attraction for the Supreme Personality of Godhead is the highest perfection of religion. That means perfection of religion. Normally we say, common people have a misunderstanding when it comes to religion. Religion, they say, means Hindu religion, that religion. No, religion is actually attaining attraction for the personality of Godhead, the Sri Krishna. And this Vedas were taught to the Lord Brahma in the beginning of creation. And Brahma also wanted to be a scholar. That is why he studied this 3 times with great attention, concentrating on the purpose of the Vedas. And then he could conclude that attraction of the Lord is the greatest, highest perfection. In the 35th sloka, it is said that the personality of Godhead, Lord Shri Krishna, is in every living being along with the individual soul. And this fact is perceived and hypothesized in our acts of seeing and taking help from the intelligence. Now, we all have been given intelligence. Everybody has got intelligence, but one should know how to use his intelligence. The Lord cannot be seen, our contaminated present contaminated material senses, but it can be, Lord can be seen only purely by the Lord's mercy or a pure devotee of the Lord. A pure devotee of the Lord can enable others to see the vision, have a vision of the Lord in the heart. This Paramatma is not very easy to realize also, but one can realize by understanding our senses, our abilities, etc. For example, we are seeing why everybody is not able to see all the time. It is only through the eyes that are empowered by the Lord for us we are able to see. Similarly, some has a sense of taste, some don't have a sense of taste. Some have a sense of touch, some don't have. So all these, for example, if the Lord feels that one's hand should not work, he gives paralysis. So all these, whatever we are able to function through our body and the senses, is through purely by the mercy of the Lord. And that mercy of the Lord comes to the Lord who is situated in the heart. But if we use our intelligence as to how we are working and try to analyze, we will understand that it is coming by a higher power. And that higher power is none other than spirit. So in this sloka, there is mention that one that is called matter and the other one that is called spirit. And the third one is called the Supreme Spirit. There are three important points in this. That is, matter is dead as far as there is no spirit in it. For example, when we say a dead body cannot move because the spirit soul has already left the body. So that is matter. And then what comes is the spirit, which is identity on its own. And this spirit soul, when it enters this body, the body is active. So, and then there is a supreme spirit or the super soul, who is the Paramatma, who is situated in the heart, and he is there watching everything that is acting, what our mind is thinking, what our intelligence, when our intelligence is working, it comes through the mercy of the Lord. The Lord himself says in Bhagavad Gita to Arjuna, Sarvasya Chaham Vidhisannivishta Matasmati Jnanam Apokarancha. That means, yes, remembrance comes from me, forgetfulness comes from me, and all these many times we might see, we might remember something which might have been past very, very old, long back, but we suddenly remember. And many times what happens is that we might forget something that has even happened in the recent past. So the Lord says that everything comes from me, for remembrance, forgetfulness, everything comes from me. And this happens by the presence of the super soul who is there as the Paramatma in our heart. And it's mentioned in this sloka that it is the intelligence that can give one direction to this higher, understand this higher authority. That means we must use our intelligence, and by proper use of intelligence and analysis, one can understand these three vital aspects, that it is the super soul who is guiding us and also supplying us according to our desire. Now, we might desire something, but we might desire something, but the desire is also fulfilled by the Lord. Now, that desire, and there is something called deserve. We might desire, but we may not deserve. But whether we deserve or not, and then accordingly, the fulfillment of the desire happens by the mercy of the Supreme Lord. So, if one is able to divert his intelligence in the proper way, he can understand these three, that is matter, spirit, and super spirit. This is also explained in Bhagavad Gita in many places. I'm skipping a few important points, in the sense due to shortage of time. And then in the 36th sloka, I'm reciting the sloka because it's a very important sloka, 36 and 37. 36th sloka, Sukadev Goswami says, Tasmat, one second. Tasmat Sarvatmana Rajan Harihi Sarvatra Sarvada Srotabhya Kirtitavyascha Smartabhyo Bhagavan Ranam. The translation is summarizing, O King, it is therefore essential that every human being hear about, glorify, and remember the Supreme Lord, the personality of Godhead, always and everywhere. So there are some very important points here. He says that therefore it is Now, tasmat means therefore. Therefore is a conclusion. That means when after discussing a subject matter, somebody says therefore. Therefore means it is a conclusion. There is nothing beyond that. He says that it is essential that every human being hear about, glorify and remember the Supreme Lord. We must hear about the Lord. After we hear, we must glorify the Lord. And in the process of glorification of the Lord, we must also remember the Supreme Lord. And this must be done always and everywhere. Now, there is no other auspicious means for deliverance other than this sublime process of Bhakti Yoga. Now, there are, of course, many other 9 processes given in Srimad Bhagavatam, where Prahlad Maharaj says Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu Smaranam, Padasevanam, Archanam. But all the 9 processes, the most important part is hearing, because you can't chant effectively unless until you hear what you chant. You can't know about the Lord, or you can't know about the process of Bhakti Yoga unless and until you hear. So hearing is the most important, and one should hear sufficiently and also properly. Then one can make progress in this method of practice. And for hearing this, the Lord has given his costless mercy through Vyasadeva, who is a powerful incarnation of the Lord. And he has compiled all this in the form of the essence of Vedas, which is Srimad Bhagavatam. Therefore, it is said that this should be heard and glorified everywhere and always. This is the special duty of a human being. Now, text number 37 is also a very important sloka. It says, पिबन्ति ये भगवत आत्मनः सतां कथामृतं श्रवणपूतेषु संवृतं पुनन्ति ते विषय विदुषिताशयं भजन्ति तच्चरण suroruhantikam. The translation is very important. Those who drink through oral reception, fully filled with the nectarian message of Lord Krishna, the beloved of the devotees, purify the polluted aim of life known as material enjoyment, and thus go back to Godhead, to the lotus feet of him that is the personality of Godhead. We'll understand some of the important points of this sloka. It says that those who drink through oral reception, that means those who hear the nectarian message of Lord Krishna, the beloved of the devotees. That means Lord Krishna is very dear to the devotees. And those who hear this nectarian message of the Lord purify the polluted aim of life known as material enjoyment. So we all have a polluted aim of life, that is, we want to enjoy material. But when one hears this message of the personality of Godhead, one becomes purified, and thus what happens is that he goes back to Godhead to attain the lotus feet of him. That is, one attains the lotus feet of the personality of Godhead. Now, the sufferings of the human society are due to this polluted aim, that is lording over the material nature. And the more the human society engages in exploitation of the undeveloped material resources for sense gratification, the more one becomes trapped by the illusory material energy of the Lord. That means the more we want to enjoy, the Lord puts us more into his illusory power. And that is why the distress of this material world never gets diminished. On the other hand, it keeps on increasing. There's also mentioned that Lord has provided all the necessities for a sustenance of a human life. It is not that anything is scarce. He has provided food grains, he has given milk, fruits, everything that is required for sustenance in this human form of life is already supplied by the Lord. So the source is complete and supply is also complete. And only by little energy, by utilizing the human energy, a human being is required to divert all these things into the proper channel. That means by using our intelligence, one can utilize all these things through a proper channel, that is diverting everything or using everything in the service of the Lord. Also, there is mentioned that there is no need for all the struggle that one goes through in this material life, in this world. And for a pure devotee of the Lord, any topics in relation with the Lord's name, fame, quality are all pleasing, And because such topics have been approved by great devotees like Narada, Hanuman, Nanda Maharaj, and all the inhabitants of Vrindavana, such messages are transcendental and pleasing to the heart and soul. So when we hear, of course, today's is a bit philosophical in nature, but when we hear the glories of the Lord, the pastimes of the Lord, it is pleasing not only to to us in physical, but also even the soul is pleased. And by constant hearing of the message of Bhagavad Gita and of Srimad Bhagavatam, one is assured by Shukadeva Goswami that he will reach the personality of Godhead and render transcendental loving service in the spiritual planet of the name of Goloka Vrindavana, which resembles a huge lotus flower. That means Goloka Vrindavana planet resembles a huge lotus flower, and there one can attain by the process of Bhakti Yoga. In devotional service, one establishes a relationship with the Lord, and one can even taste happiness, even this material world. That means in Ashtanga Yoga process and other processes, one can develop some taste. One thing is the goal is different. The process is also difficult. At the same time, one cannot taste this result of the process unless until one reaches the goal. So one cannot, until one reaches Brahmajyoti, one cannot realize how the Brahmajyoti will be. But in the case of Bhakti Yoga, it is said that even when one starts practicing at the beginning stage, we are all in the beginning stage of Bhakti, which is called Sadhana Bhakti. One can taste some happiness of material happiness as well as some spiritual happiness, even in the beginning stage of this Bhakti Yoga. So that is why it is said that Bhakti Yoga is most successful and most pleasing to the Lord as well as to the living entity. Even at the beginning stage, one can relish. The 11th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, actually, the Bhagavatam has got 12 cantos. And as we progress further from 1 to 3 to 4, in the 11th canto, the Lord tells Uddhava, he says, by mystic yoga, great austerities, and the renounced order of life, the pure destinations of Mahaloka, Janaloka, Tapaloka, and Satyaloka are attained. But by devotional yoga, one achieves my transcendental abode. That means the Lord is telling that by all these difficult processes of karma, jnana, and all those things, one can reach Janaloka, Tapaloka, and Satyaloka. But by devotional practice, one can attain my transcendental abode. It's a very important quote I found in Chaitanya Bhagavat. It says, in the Srimad Bhagavatam, devotional service is described as the ultimate goal of life. The four Vedas declare that Srimad Bhagavatam is a manifestation of ecstatic love. That means Bhagavatam describes that Srimad Bhagavatam describes that devotional service is the ultimate goal, and Srimad Bhagavatam is also a manifestation of ecstatic love. Srimad Bhagavatam is non-different from the Lord. The Lord being absolute, anything related to the Lord, like the holy name, even Srimad Bhagavatam, they are non-different. So when one reads Bhagavatam, one understands Bhagavatam, when one hears Srimad Bhagavatam, it becomes a source of manifestation of ecstatic love. Before I conclude this today's session, there is a small pastime which I would like to narrate. This is mentioned Bhagavad Bhagavatamrita. It says mentions about a Gopakumara. He took initiation from a spiritual master, and he had the opportunity to travel through so many planets like Janaloka, Tapaloka, and all. Finally, when he came to Satyaloka, he also saw the Lord there, because there is a small place where there's a Vaikuntha planet which is there in Satyaloka also. And then when he saw the Lord being worshipped there in awe and reverence, he was still not satisfied. So, but the Lord within him brought this stage where he was not feeling fully satisfied. So then it is said that he was being served so very opulently by all the queens of the Lord, but still he was not feeling fully satisfied, and he was trying to find out. He was told that the only place where he can fulfill his desire is to go to Goloka Vrindavan. So finally, he was told that to reach Goloka Vrindavan, he has to go back to the earthly planet and hear the glories of the Lord. So he came back to the earth planet and then heard the glories of the Lord. And this time, instead of going through all these planets, he entered the spiritual world. Of course, it's a very long pastime. But the point is that one can achieve the topmost planet, that is Goloka Vrindavana, only by Bhakti Yoga process. And by other process, one cannot achieve this place. There is one small point that I want to give mention before concluding the class. In this pastime itself, it is said that where Lord Shiva is telling, one who has completely perfected his religious duties, who is pure, who is done with selfish motives, can achieve the mercy of Sri Hari. If that mercy is multiplied 100 times, that means one who has perfected his religious life, he can get the mercy of Lord Hari. If that mercy is multiplied 100 times, one can attain the post of Brahma. And if 100 times again multiplied, one can become like me. And if one obtains, this is what Lord Shiva is telling. And if one obtains a mercy 100 times more than I, one becomes eligible to go to Vaikuntha. So the point is that it is not very easy for a living entity to leave this material world. But at the same time, through this process of Bhakti Yoga, one can easily reach his constitutional position of serving the Lord. So with this, I conclude the class for the day. You can take some questions, some comments, if you have, for the next few minutes. I'm sorry for the delay in starting because there was some confusion on the Zoom password and code. I can take some questions or comments.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna.
I just want a clarification.